I am Shadene Arbani. I am the Partnerships and Programs Manager for First Draft. I'm based in New York City with Diera and some of the rest of our team. Today, we're going to be talking about research and monitoring. So yesterday, for those of you who were able to make it, Amy gave you guys sort of an intro to the information landscape. What are the tactics we're seeing agents of misinformation use? What are the trends that we're seeing and how information flows online and on social media in particular? Today, we're going to get a little less theoretical and a little more practical. So really thinking about how can you guys working with us be best equipped to find misinformation that is flowing online, and not just misinformation, but trends in your state, questions that the public is answering that aren't being answered by local media, data voids, basically just how can you find information that will prove as valuable insights, not just for our team, but for your local media landscape. So today is all about research and monitoring tips, and that's what we're going to do. The first thing I want to talk about is TweetDeck. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this tool. I imagine a substantial number of you, but perhaps it isn't something that you use on the daily. TweetDeck is probably the best tool that is out there for monitoring Twitter. And we use it a lot for looking at Twitter. I'm going to show you what the platform looks like for those of you who aren't familiar with it. And then we're going to use that as a way to talk about how to structure search strings. Because ultimately, researching is all about how good you can search. So that's what we're talking about today. How you can write search strings to find exactly what you're looking for. So I'm going to exit out of this presentation because I want to actually open up TweetDeck and show you guys what it looks like and some of the things that you can do. If you have a Twitter account, there's no extra setup involved for using TweetDeck. You just go straight to this URL, tweetdeck.twitter.com. If it's the first time you're using it, it might say something like, permission to connect to your account or something like that. But it's integrated with Twitter. So if you have a Twitter account, this is something you have access to already. The way that TweetDeck works is that it has these different columns. And these columns can be either searches that you've inputted. They can also be lists that you've made, or just the tweets of a particular user. You can see that my TweetDeck has a lot of columns. Let's see if you can scroll. There's a lot of columns. And most of these are just based on searches, and that's what we're going to talk about today. But I wanted to show you first what this looks like. The way that setting up a search in TweetDeck essentially works is you click this little button right here. You can also go down to this plus add column sign, and you can click search, but that just takes you right here. So that's what we're going to do. And you just enter in a search. So you could say, for example, George Floyd, right? And then that will pull up a stream of all of the different tweets mentioning George Floyd's name. And it does it in real time. Now, of course, right now, that's going to give you a lot of content, and you may find that the Twitter feed will actually move as it's doing right now because of how much content is flowing. And so you can filter that content a little bit using these filter options up here above. So you can see right here, it says tweet content matching George Floyd. That's just where our search was. You can exclude certain words. You can specify a language. You can specify a location as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about this because for you guys monitoring content in your local area, it's going to be really dependent on finding content that is local, right? So being able to take all of the content on a social platform and narrow it down to a specific location is going to be really important for you guys. And it's not actually that easy. And one of the caveats about typing in a location right here is that actually a lot of tweets on Twitter are not geotagged. So if you type in Detroit, for instance, right here, that will give you results that have been geotagged with that location, but it won't give you any of the tweets that have not been geotagged with Detroit, even if they mention Detroit, for instance. So that is one thing that you can do that can be helpful, but with that caveat. And another big thing is you can filter by engagement. So you could say, okay, well, I only want to see the tweets that have 50 retweets. We're going to talk a lot more throughout the week about what kind of content we're looking for in our research. Maddie on Friday is going to do a session on effective reporting, and she's going to talk about the concept of spread and virality and how we sort of measure what is important to think about in terms of how impactful a piece of information is. We don't like to amplify information that hasn't spread anywhere. So we always like to look at these metrics, right, around retweets and how fast content is moving. But we'll talk more about that later. So that is just an introduction to what this looks like. But now I want to jump back into how you actually structure search strings in TweetDeck. So Boolean queries. We're going to talk a lot about Boolean queries. It's one of the main things we're going to cover in this session. And the reason, sorry about that. And the reason for that is that Boolean queries are a way to get really specific search results using these three operators, and, or, and the minus sign. They can look very intimidating and complicated, but they're pretty simple once you break them down. And once you learn to master Boolean queries, you can end up finding some very, very tailored specific content. So let me just exit out of this. Okay, so so how do Boolean queries work? Boolean queries are a way of connecting keywords using these three connectors, or, and the minus sign. The most common one we use is or. When you connect two words with or, it means I want to see all of the content on TweetDeck, for example, that has the word reopen in the tweet, or it has the word protest in the tweet. When you take this phrase, reopen or protest, and you plug it into Twitter, that will give you results for all of the tweets that contain either of these words. Now, that is going to be a lot of tweets because right now there's protests around the country, right? Now, what those results are not going to show you, for example, are results that are specifically about the reopen protests that were happening a week or a couple weeks ago. Remember, like, there was a wave of protests around the country before the death of George Floyd where groups were protesting the lockdowns, right? And that was when reopen sort of became a big word, and everyone was talking about reopening, right? And we had the wave of reopen protests. But because we've connected these two words with or, we're saying we're not looking for content about the reopen protests. We're looking for any content that mentions reopen or protests, right? Now, given that a lot of the protesting that's happening around the country right now is about police brutality and the death of George Floyd, if you plug this into Twitter, you are likely going to find a lot of that kind of content. But what if, for some reason, you were still researching the lockdown resistance, or you wanted to find old tweets about the lockdown resistance and people who were upset about the lockdown? what you could do is you could connect these with and, reopen and protest. That tells the search engine, that tells Twitter that you want to see tweets that include both of those words. It means both of these words have to be contained in the tweet in order for it to come up in the search results. And so that's the difference between or and is or says, I want to see just one of these words, and says, I want to see both of these words. Now there is a third operator that we don't use as often, but can be really useful. And that is the minus sign. And what the minus sign says is, I want to see all of the search results that mention the word reopen, but do not mention the word protest. So I'm not sure how useful that would be now, but you can imagine that if you were researching what social media chatter was looking like during the time of the reopen protests, this would give you a set of search results about reopening and the lockdown, but was not about people protesting. And maybe that would be interesting for you for some reason. It's particularly useful when you are searching for something and you're getting a set of results that's connected to another topic, maybe one that's big in the news right now that you're not interested in. So the minus sign allows you to say to the search engine, okay, I want these results, but not if it includes this word. Okay, moving on. So one way to think about the difference between or and that I think is really helpful is that connecting words with or is going to expand your results, and connecting search words with and is going to limit your results. So for example, if you wanted to do a sweep on Twitter for people talking about the protests, you might plug something like this. You could say protest or riot or violence or burn or looting or police or cops, etc., etc. All of these are various words that might give you tweets related to the protests, right? And what you're saying to Twitter is, I want a tweet that includes any of these words. It's a lot of words, which means it's going to give you more results because you're saying it could be one of any of these, right? On the other hand, when you connect words with search words with and, that's going to limit your results. So in this case, I have written here protest and BLM, Black Lives Matter, and Minneapolis. This is going to give you a very specific set of tweets because you're telling Twitter, okay, I want my search results to include all of these words. So it has to mention something about a protest. It has to include BLM or the hashtag BLM, and it has to include Minneapolis. So on the one hand, expansive results, limited results. So and is kind of one of those operators you have to be really careful about, because if you include too many ands, it's going to limit your results significantly, and then you're not going to have any tweet results at all. So one thing that you can do if you type in a Boolean query in your Twitter, your TweetDeck, and it says 0 results, is to look back and say, okay, did I include too many and statements? Maybe that's making my search too restrictive. One thing that you might have noticed in the last slide is that I had quotation marks around some of the words. Quotations are what you use when you have to search for a phrase. So all of these other words, and you can see in this slide as well, all of these are single words except for National Guard. That's 2 words. So if you want to find an exact phrase, then that has to be surrounded by quotation marks. So you can see here, if you wanted to find content about unemployment around the country, you could say unemployed or furloughed or quotation marks out of work. Okay. I want to pause.
We have one question.
Sure.
From Katrina. She says, so for the minus sign one, would it exclude tweets that include both words or just tweets with the word protest?
Just tweets with the word protest. So let's go back to that slide here. So it says reopen space minus protest. So the minus only applies to the word that's right after it. And if you wanted to include another one, you would have to include another minus sign. So for example, let's say all of my search results ended up being about hair salons. And I'm like, no, Twitter, I don't want to see any more content about hair salons. You could do that. So that's how it works. Any other questions about these 3 connectors or anything else we've covered so far?
Is also asked a question, can you combine the commands? Like, for example, connect the search terms with both or minus sign in a query?
Yes, and we are about to cover that. First of all, I just want to show you how this works in action. So I'm going to go back to TweetDeck. You can see here I have my column here that says George Floyd. I'm gonna enter in. I'm gonna change this query. I'm gonna say unemployment and Detroit, with the idea being that I want tweets that are specifically about unemployment in Detroit. And I'm gonna change the engagement back to 0 so that it doesn't limit my results. And I'm gonna hit enter. Okay, so now you can see immediately we have tweets that are talking about unemployment as it relates to as it relates to tweet, sorry. I'm on my personal computer right now because Zoom was not working on my work computer, so unfortunately I have all my notifications turned on. But you can see here we have a quote about unemployment among the Black community in Detroit. And if you scroll down, you'll probably see similar results as well. Now, if we change this, on the other hand, to unemployment or Detroit, that tells Twitter, I want tweets that mention either of those words. So you're going to get a set of much more general results. Here is a tweet that mentions Detroit, but it doesn't mention unemployment. And you can see also, because the results are much more expansive, the column is moving faster, right? Because there's more content. You can scroll. So this is a set of tweets that talks variously either about unemployment anywhere or Detroit generally. So let's go back to the presentation. And I'm going to show you how this kind of gets more advanced and how you can combine things. We talked about phrases. Okay. So this is the answer to your question. This is how you can combine and or searches. Generally, the way that it works is that we try to group similar words in parentheses, and we connect those with or. And then in between the different groups of words, we put an and. So that's a little hard to grasp conceptually, so let's just work through this example. So here, you can see we say unemployed or furloughed or out of work, and that's grouped in a parentheses, and Detroit or Grand Rapids or Michigan, and that's grouped. So what is this doing? This is saying to Twitter, okay, I want to see a set of results where the tweets have one of these words. It can be any of them. It doesn't have to be all of them, just one of them, because they're connected by or. And I want it to have one of these words. So we're basically saying to Twitter, because of this and statement, I have to have one of these and I have to have one of these. But because these are connected with ors, it can be any one of them, right? Let me know. I'm going to pause for just a second to see if there are any questions about that. And then I will show you another example.
Yeah, right now we have a few more questions.
Okay.
Let's see, I just want to make sure I go in the right order. So do we need to put the search terms in quotation marks or inside parentheses? I just want to make
Uh,
sure I'm asking that question correctly.
uh, the so I'm not sure exactly what you mean, but basically quotation marks are only if you have a phrase. So you can see here, out of work is a phrase that indicates unemployment, right? And so because it's a phrase, we've put it in quotation marks. But unemployed and furloughed don't need to be in quotation marks because they're single words. Um, Parentheses are what you use when you're working with both or and statements and you want to group them. So if you want to say, okay, I'm looking for this or this or this or this or this, you put that all in a parentheses and then you connect it with and you say, I'm also looking for this or this or this. Hopefully to answer your question. Let me know or rephrase it if it doesn't. What's the next question about?
Are the keywords case sensitive?
No, they're not. That's a really good question. The keywords are not case sensitive. So it doesn't matter. That's why I had BLM in lowercase. I would typically put BLM in uppercase because the L is kind of hard to tell if it's an I or an L, right? But the reason I actually put it in lowercase is because I like to have the Boolean operators stand out really clearly, and those have to be uppercase. Okay, so modification to my answer. The Boolean operators have to be uppercase or an and. Your words, your keywords do not have to be. So there are very particular cases where this can get tricky. For example, if you are a person who's based in Oregon, I don't know if we have any Oregon students today, and you want to use OR, which is the state abbreviation for Oregon, as a keyword, that can get tricky. But typically it's not a problem, and I just like to make that distinction between my keywords being lowercase and my operators being uppercase so that I can see it clearly. You can see here I put Detroit in uppercase, but it doesn't need to be. Neither does Grand Rapids or Michigan. Other questions?
Right now we have one more. If a tweet was linked with a link to an article includes search terms in the article headline, would those tweets come up?
Can you say that one more time?
If a tweet, whoa, sorry, I just combined two words. If a tweet was linked, if a tweet with a linked article, sorry, if a tweet with a linked article includes search terms in the article headline, would those tweets come up?
That is a really good question. And I want to say the answer is yes, but I'm actually not positive. So I will try and figure out that for you, and we can let you know in a follow-up. You can also try just playing around with TweetDeck and Twitter, like if there's an article you know exists, seeing if it comes up. But I'm actually not sure. What I can tell you is that if one of your search terms is in the account name of the Twitter user, that will show up. And that is the reason I am guessing it also comes up in the linked article. But it's hard to say just because those linked articles are previews. So I don't know to what extent that data gets rolled in. Don't make any assumptions. Play around. I'll try playing around with it as well. Other questions?
That's all for right now, but I'll let you know if there are anything more.
Cool. Okay, and we are at 2:05. Okay, so let's see a more complicated version of this. Okay, here is an example of a longer Boolean query. They can get really long, honestly, depending on how many words you're including. And it's not uncommon for, if you're looking at like a first draft employee dashboard, for you to see something like this. However, if you break it down, it's actually not that complicated. So let's Let's do that right now. This is the same thing. I've just separated them out so that you can see clearly what's going on. So you can see in this first section, I have a whole bunch of words that are about protests. Protest, riot, demonstration, police, cops, looting, burn, tase, tear gas, National Guard, LAPD. And then I also have a specific set of words that are all about Los Angeles. Los Angeles, LA, Hollywood. So this could also be in lowercase, to go back to that question we had before. Los Angeles, LA, Hollywood, Sunset Boulevard. Ooh, here's a mistake, actually. So there should be a quotation around this boulevard. Wilshire, Westwood, Glendale, Van Nuys. If you've ever been to the Los Angeles area, you may recognize a couple of those last words. So what is this complicated Boolean query doing? Well, it's basically saying that I want to see tweets on the platform that are about protests, but are in Los Angeles, or someone who's talking about Los Angeles. And although it's a long Boolean query, it is probably going to give you lots of results. And the reason for that is because there's only one and statement. So we're only limiting our query to 2 criteria. And within those criteria, we're giving it lots of different options. So I'm saying I want a tweet that includes any of these words. So maybe the tweet only includes the word protests and Hollywood, for example. And then same thing. Within these, I'm giving it lots of different words about Los Angeles. So I'm saying to Twitter, I want to see tweets that are about LA in general. I want to see tweets that mention Hollywood, tweets that mention Glendale, tweets that mention Westwood. So if, for example, you wanted to monitor protests that were across the LA, the greater Los Angeles area, you could actually include way more words in this. You could include Pasadena, you could include Orange County, right? You could include whatever it is you want to include. Or even, if you were monitoring protests in 2 different cities, you could include a whole bunch of words here that were about San Francisco as well. But the idea is that we're giving it lots of options within these 2 criteria. So the more or options you give the platform, remember that expands your results. So you're going to get more options. And the more times you use and, that's going to limit it. So any questions about this example? And I will give it another second.
Right now there are no, oh, Shakira is asking a question. Would these Boolean queries be recognized the same way on any search engine, Google, Bing, Facebook, etc.?
Good question. The answer is no, but some of them, yes. So for example, Google recognizes Boolean queries. Actually, lots of platforms, the reason we teach it is because lots of platforms, in fact, recognize Boolean queries. And if they don't recognize Boolean queries, they often have a version of it that is very similar. I don't know how many of you are familiar with CrowdTangle for Facebook. It is a great tool for monitoring Facebook. And it doesn't quite allow you to do Boolean queries, but the way the advanced search is set up mimics aspects of it. So that's why it's good to understand, but it does work for Google and it does work for Twitter. And I'm pretty sure it works for like Bing and Yandex and like the actual search engines. So you need to check about like Bing and Yandex and any other like browser search engine. But Twitter and Google definitely, and that's what we use a lot of. So that's why we teach it. Any other questions before I move on?
Right now there are no other questions.
Okay. And you can usually search too, like does X platform search Boolean queries if you think of another platform and you want to find out. And usually there will be some specifications from the platform about how it works. For example, Twitter uses the minus sign for eliminating search terms. Some platforms use the word not. I think maybe even on Google, they use not or the minus sign. So yeah, there's small differences like that. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so one cool little trick that we do at First Draft is sometimes we will add to our Boolean query another and statement and this group of words, me or my or I. And the reason for that is that sometimes what you are looking for is a firsthand account of an event, especially during things like protests and like breaking news events. We're really interested in finding content that is from people on the ground, right? In general, as reporters, I think we're interested in that. So the way that you can do that on social media is by thinking about words people are putting in their tweets that actually signify that they are there, right? So sometimes I will take a query that I write and I will tack on the end of it and this group of words in hopes of finding some firsthand experiences. One thing to note is that when you're in TweetDeck, you know how it has those filters at the top that I showed you? And one of them is engagement. So you have to be really careful about remembering what your engagement settings are. Like sometimes I will have a whole bunch of columns and I will change what the search column is. Like I just did a couple minutes ago. I started out searching for tweets about George Floyd, and then I just edited it to be about unemployment, right? When I was searching George Floyd, I had the engagement set to 50 retweets. If you are searching for like personal eyewitness, like, oh, this thing just happened to me, tweets, and your engagement is set to 50, it's probably going to drastically limit your results because a lot of those kinds of tweets do not get retweeted. So it's just a reminder to be careful about your filter settings and remembering like what are the different ways I'm limiting my results. But this is a nice little trick that you can use when you're really looking for those eyewitness experiences. Another thing that we do a lot of at First Draft is thinking about what are the questions people are asking about a particular topic. You know, one of the things that we have really been trying to do with coronavirus, but in general, is to serve reporters by helping them understand what the online conversations are. And people typically think of First Draft as like we're all about mis and disinformation, right? And that is fundamental to what we do, and explaining what the misinformation is online to journalists so that it can help inform their reporting, right? But another side to that is understanding what people are asking online that is then not being reflected in the reporting that you see about it, right? So that's another way we try to serve journalists. How can we take what we're seeing and reporting and take what we're seeing online, and where are the gaps there? So really thinking all the time about how we can be service to journalists and the public and raise like sort of the quality of journalism by making it more responsive to what people need. So we're really interested in public questions. That's a very long-winded way of saying that. But one of the tricks that you can do to find that is to actually include a question mark in place of a keyword in your search. So I have a couple of examples here. I've written hydroxychloroquine. I hope I spelled that correctly. And question mark. And if you pop this into Twitter, and I'll just show you. If you pop this into Twitter, oops, that's not what I meant. Take this column. Am I spelling this correctly? I don't even know now. So much doubt. queen and question mark. Now, something I'm not sure about is whether the question mark needs quotations. I put quotations because quotations don't hurt you. Like if you put quotation marks around a single word, it's not going to affect your search results in a negative way. You just don't need them because usually we use quotation marks for phrases. So I put quotation marks around the question mark because I don't know if the fact that it's a punctuation mark confuses the system at all. It probably doesn't, but I did it just to be safe. So you can see here, now we have a set of tweets that are talking about hydroxychloroquine, but they include a question of some sort. Now, this is going to give you some rhetorical questions as well, of course, probably some angry people phrasing their, views in terms of sarcastic questions, but it will also return legitimate questions. So this is a pretty general search, but if we look back at this example, which is unemployment or unemployed or PUA, paid unemployment assistance, or eviction, and a question mark, then you might get some more specific results. I'm going to do that here. Unemployment or unemployed or eviction. So the purpose of this search is because what we've seen as the country is reopening is that a lot of people are confused about how the support systems that some of the states have put in are changing or not. So like as people are getting called back to work, as businesses are reopening, people are wondering, is my unemployment assistance going to stay? Am I going to be evicted because I can't pay rent? These are a lot of the things that we've been seeing. So this search is an effort to find some of those questions. You can see we have some content in other languages as well. And you can sort of filter through and see if you need to make any adjustments to that search. Okay.
We have one question from Matthew.
Sure thing.
If you use the term unemployed, would it pull up unemployment and unemployed because it's the root of those words?
I think, if you use the word unemployed?
If you use the term unemployed, would unemployment and unemployed also come up?
Yeah, it would.
Okay.
Yeah, that's something that I've noticed.
And then we have one more question from Shakira. Can you expand the Twitter search bar to see the entire Boolean search string?
No, and so this is why, and I have a list of tips that I've written up. This is why actually one of the main things that I'll do is I will open up my notepad or I'll open up a text edit. Often I'll do a text edit. And I will write out my Boolean query here. And, sometimes I'll do this, right, or load. And the reason for that being exactly what I think you were implying, which is that this this search bar is very small. And this one is as well. And if you try and write out a long Boolean query here, you're probably going to mess up. And then if you type like a parentheses wrong, or you put an and where you meant to put an or, it's going to be hard to see. It's kind of like using a calculator or like writing code. Like you want to maximize your chances of not messing up. So I will often write out, if the Boolean query is going to be long. If it's short, I'll just write it in here. But if it's going to be long, I'll write it here and then I'll copy it and paste it into my TweetDeck. That's a good question. Any others?
Right now, that's all.
Great. Okay, cool. Okay, so here are a list of reminders. So what we just said, use a text edit or notepad to write out your Boolean query before you paste it anywhere. Paste it. Always put and or in capital letters. Use quotation marks when your keyword is a phrase. In other words, when it's more than one word. Remember to use or when you want to expand your results and when you want to limit your results. So generally speaking, having more than one and, like even just having two ands, that drastically limits your results. Anytime you include another and, even if you're only connecting single words, that is going to drastically limit your results. On the other hand, if you add lots of or statements, that only expands them. Group similar keywords in parentheses, and then use me, my, and I to find eyewitness experiences. Last of all, check your work. So I often make the comparison with Boolean queries kind of like math, like long statements in math where you have to group things with parentheses and you have different operations going on, right? When you plug something into your calculator that's complicated, I don't know if your teachers told you this like growing up, but my math teachers always said, now check the answer that the calculator gave you and ask yourself, does it make sense? Well, Boolean queries are very similar to that. You're going to write a long phrase. You're going to hope that it gives you a certain set of results. You're going to plug it into TweetDeck. But then you're going to look at your results and you're going to say, does this make sense? Is this the set of results that I expected? And if it's not what you expected, then you should go back and look at your query and see if there's anything funky about it. So any questions about that? And I think we're moving on. Yeah, we're moving on from Boolean queries to hit a couple last points. No questions?
Oh, yeah, right now there aren't any questions.
Great. Okay. So now I want to step back a second and talk about keywords. And I hope for those of you who are somewhat familiar with Boolean queries, this isn't too rudimentary. The reason we really cover these basics in depth is because search queries and the words that you use in search queries are really the foundation for everything. And you can get drastically different results because of the way that you're searching. And there are lots of different platforms that you can search on, and we'll show you some of the other ones that we often check at the end. And maybe in a couple weeks we'll even have a follow-up session on some of the lesser known platforms. But usually that's just about getting used to the platform, and really being able to phrase your search is the foundation. So the next thing I want to talk about is the keywords that you're actually putting into these queries and how important they are. So there are a lot of different ways to say things. Our research manager, Rory Smith, who will be doing the Facebook monitoring session on Thursday, which I really recommend all of you going to, because I think that even more than Twitter, Facebook has really been the place where local conversations are happening across the US. It's just a better platform for it, and more people are on it. So I really recommend you go to that session. But he linked us to a data set that somebody had put together of all of the top hashtags people were using in relation to coronavirus when the pandemic started. And this is a little bit old now. I'd say this is a month and a half old data set. So I'm sure the conversation has changed in some capacity, at least, in terms of the hashtags that people are using. But this is just the data set went on and on and on, and this is just a snippet of it. So these are some of the top words people use when they're talking about coronavirus. You'll notice that some of them just differ based on spelling. There's misspellings, corona, corona, corona. There's like slangier versions of things, differences in the way people use punctuation. It's important to think about these different words because these are the words people are using in their tweets. So if you're trying to find content based on language, you need to be aware of like, what is the breadth of that language? So that's not to say whenever I'm looking for something about coronavirus, I include all of these different words connected by or statements, but it's definitely something I think about. And you can see there are like some more conspiratorial, maybe racist or borderline racist, depending on the person who's using the word, terms as well. We have Wuhan flu, Chinese flu, Wuhan virus, Wuhan coronavirus. There's a set of words that was specifically about like social distancing. You can see we have the WHO here. MAGA was a top one, of course, that kind of stands on its own. China coronavirus, some terms in Spanish. But yeah, this is just to get you thinking about the fact that there's a lot of ways to say things. And it's worth, when you're sort of laying out what are the topics you're interested in monitoring, thinking about what is the range of words that people are using. And the other thing that you have to think about is the fact that languages change. Language changes depending on ideology. So this isn't necessarily a left-right divide. Coronavirus, for example, is a general term. But here are just some differences in words that are about the same topic, but are totally different because of the ideology of the person who's using the word, right? So Team Joe is a hashtag that is associated with Joe Biden supporters. Hell no, Joe is also talking about Joe Biden, but that comes from the right or the left, maybe, but people who are not supporters of Joe Biden, of course. Vote by mail has been a topic that we've been looking at very closely with regards to the election because of the pandemic and how voting is going to work across the country. That is sort of a neutral term. On the other hand, ballot harvesting is a term that we have seen mainly on the right to indicate basically the same thing, but it has this implication of people or organizations are gathering people's ballots to do something fraudulent or nefarious with them. Same thing with coronavirus, right? The term Wuhan flu is about coronavirus, but it comes from a particular perspective, to put that very graciously. And then same even with protest and riot. This I think is more debatable. I've seen in my own circles people who are all for the protests and participating in them, referring to them as riots. But it does exist as a language divide. This data set of people who are using the word protest to describe the response to police brutality is vastly different from the data set of people who are using the word riot. Now, there's a lot of overlap, of course, but those differences are really worth thinking about. And they're especially worth thinking about because they're going to affect the content that you see. So you can use this either to make sure that you're getting perspectives from lots of different kinds of groups, or you can use this to isolate what you're getting. Maybe you only want to see people who are against voting by mail. And if that's the case, you really should be using the term ballot harvesting, because that's the kind of language those people who are against it are using. It's the same thing with issues like Second Amendment rights, gun supporters. One of the ways people refer to Second Amendment rights and gun rights online is 2A. You might not have thought of that because it's not how people talk in real life, but it is how people talk online, and they will hashtag 2A or just use it as a shorthand. So that's why it's good to brainstorm these things. So here's a list of reminders about keywords. So one, making a list of all the keywords that might be associated with a topic you're researching is a good place to start. It's certainly not something we do every day. Like, I'm constantly modifying my tweet deck. I'm not always being really systematic and like making a list and adding words to the list when I find it, but it is something I will often do at the start. Like, if I'm starting to research a new topic, I'll be like, okay, what are all the different words? How are they different? What are the different ideologies? And using that as a jumping off point. Two, thinking about the language people actually use. So humans are not SEO bots, right? The words that you're going to see people use online are going to be different than the words organizations who have SEO experts are phrasing their headlines to get maximum clicks, right? So thinking about what is the natural language that people are using, and then thinking about the language people use online. So that goes right back to the point I was making about people who talk about gun rights. 2A, that's not really something you see or not something you hear, at least in casual conversation in real life, if real life even exists anymore. But in online life, it certainly is. And then thinking about how language differs across ideologies and how that might affect your search. Another thing that is constantly part of our process is, again, looking at your search results and analyzing. So are there new keywords that should be added to your list based on what you're seeing? Like, I will type in, I'll write a Boolean query, I'll make a search column in TweetDeck based on it when I'm starting to monitor a new topic. And then I'll look through the results and I'll think, are any of these other words that I didn't think of before, should they go into my query as options? And using that process to kind of like tweak as well.
We have a few questions, Shay.
Great.
So Kaylin asked, can you use numerical symbols in Boolean searches? For example, people will type racist with the @ or with an asterisk, so Twitter won't flag their account. Would you be able to use these queries searches in your phrases?
So the short answer is yes, but you have to be careful about what they mean. So actually, for example, asterisk is a Boolean operator. And I think that what it means is that that letter can be a wildcard. And I think that Twitter supports it. You would have to check. And you would check that just by searching like Twitter search asterisk or Twitter Boolean query asterisk. And I'll check on that as well. Maybe there's a way we can get out these things that I check to you guys, like maybe in the follow-up that Deira has been writing. But yes, so some symbols will just come up in search results as you search for them, and then some of them actually mean things, like the asterisk. I'm pretty sure in Google at least means that space is a wild card. So what I mean by a wild card is if you write a word and one of the letters has an asterisk, or you leave an asterisk there, you're saying to Google or the search platform, I want all results for this word, but this letter here could be anything. And the reason that is helpful is often to account for like spelling mistakes. So sometimes you're aware of a spelling mistake and you're saying, okay, it can be any letter here. Other questions?
Yeah, we have one from Francesca. She asked, can we use emojis in these searches?
Emojis. I think so. I think you can. I think I've done that. I'm not sure. Again, another thing to test. The reason I forget which things work is because there's so many platforms and they all differ slightly. So I've asked all of these questions myself, I think, at some point in the last several years, but they do differ depending on the platform that you're using. I'm pretty sure on Twitter you can search for emojis.
All right, and then we have one more from Alessandra. Can you have multiple tweet decks for multiple topics?
So you only get one tweet per Twitter account. So if you have another Twitter account, you can use that to have another tweet window and like open an incognito window, for example, and have your other tweet there. But it's based on your account. So you can't have multiple dashboards with one account, unfortunately. That would be pretty cool, actually. But to my knowledge, you can't do that. So yeah, there's something to be said for purging your TweetDeck regularly when you have outdated columns. I know for certain some of those columns on my TweetDeck are outdated, or organizing them. Like you can move the columns, you can move them around, and so you can have all of your searches about unemployment over here and all of your searches about hate crimes over here. Yeah.
2 more questions just came in. The first one's from if you want to search a specific hashtag in the query, would you include the hashtag or search the specific term and leave the hashtag out?
Yeah, I think this is something I always have to remind myself on. If you don't include the hashtag, you will still, my mom, you will still get the results for it. So if it's like hashtag hell no Joe and that's what you're looking for, if you include hell no Joe as a keyword without the hashtag, you'll still get the hashtag results. And I'm nearly certain if you do include the hashtag, you'll only get it as a hashtag, if that makes sense. These are very good and very specific questions.
We have one more right now from Shakira. She asked, what about when dealing with numbers? If we include a number as a keyword in a search, is it recognized as one word or does it have to be in quotation marks? And do you exclude commas?
It doesn't have to be in quotation marks. And so maybe that is a reason why I shouldn't be putting the question mark in quotation marks. But yeah, you can have just like the number 2 as a keyword, and that works. And you said commas, something about commas? What was that part
yes.
of it?
The last part was, and do you exclude commas?
We don't use commas in Boolean queries. The only reason you would have a comma is if you are looking for I guess a very specific phrase that included a comma within the phrase. And even then, I don't know if the presence of that comma makes a difference. I would imagine it does, because normally when you put something in quotation marks, you're telling the platform, I'm looking for this exactly as it is. And so that's why you're careful about what you put in quotation marks and it being exactly what you want. But yeah, we typically don't use commas.
And one more question came in from Kaylin. Do spaces count in keywords or in quotation marks?
Do spaces count in keywords? Okay, so I'm not sure how to, maybe you can clarify. I'm not sure how to answer that, because if you have a space between a keyword, for example, then you need to put quotation marks. So like the example of Detroit versus Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids has a space between those words, so you need to put that in quotation marks. Does that answer your question? I feel like it doesn't.
She said yes.
Oh, okay, great. Anything else?
Right now, those are all the questions.
Okay, awesome. And we're at slightly past the hour and nearly done, so I'll just show you a couple more things and then let you guys on your merry way. This is just a slide showing you all the different places you can monitor. So today we've mainly talked about Twitter. On Thursday, Rory will talk about Facebook. But just be aware that there are lots of places you can do these search queries. Reddit, for example, and I need to check if Reddit supports Booleans. It might. I don't remember. The Reddit search engine is great. Unlike Facebook, which has a really lousy search bar. I'm sure you guys all know that on some intuitive level from doing searches on there. Yeah, Reddit has a really great search bar. So Reddit, Gab is like the well, YouTube. Of course, I think YouTube also, yes, YouTube also supports Booleans. I think because of its connection to Google. But YouTube, the web, of course. Gab is like the Twitter for people who have been deplatformed. There's not a lot of people on there, but if for some reason you're monitoring some kind of incendiary, probably right-wing personality in your local area, there's a chance they have a Gab account. Discord, you guys are probably somewhat familiar with. Discord is kind of like Skype in the way that it works, but was originally a platform for like gamers and gaming. Now there's all different kinds of communities. I think my mom even has a Discord channel that she's part of about a podcast that she likes. So there's lots of chatter on Discord. You have to be very careful if you're on a platform like that to make sure that your security is up to date and that you are, not putting yourself at risk. 4chan, 8chan, of course, everyone knows about either from personal experience because you guys are youthful like me. I was on 4chan in high school. I'm not anymore. But also in the news because of its connection to like mass shootings, right, and other various nefarious things. We don't spend a lot of time on places like 4chan. I feel like it got really big in the news for a while, and I think there is maybe even an unhelpful tendency for journalists who don't quite understand the platform to like lurk on there and then blow things that people are saying on the chans like out of proportion, like as if they're more significant than they are, which is not great because there's a lot of nasty stuff on there and also just a lot of trolling, like a lot of just, Anyway, that's a rant. And then WhatsApp. You can actually monitor WhatsApp groups. That is a whole other conversation because it wades into very gray ethical territory. I wish we could have a longer conversation about that. Maddie will talk a little bit about some ethics stuff, but monitoring is a very ethically fraught activity. Like, it's one thing to look at stuff people are posting on Twitter publicly. Like, that's stuff people are putting out knowingly into the public, to the world. On a lot of these other platforms, there is, if not more privacy, there's an expectation of privacy. Facebook, for example, is, very, it's not very transparent about privacy settings, and they're hard to navigate. So some things may be public on Facebook that you find in your searches, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the person thought they were public. So I think it's not something to talk about right now, but when you're doing your research and your monitoring, to also be careful and thinking about these are humans with lives, and collecting data on them can put them at risk, even if you think it's not. And also poking unnecessarily into people's private lives can also be really problematic. So always thinking about those things when you're doing this work is really, really important, I think. And I'll just introduce you to these things. We're not going to get into them, but it's just to say that Google has a really great advanced search function if you have not played around with it already. So if you're doing searches on the actual web, you should go to google.com advanced search and kind of acquaint yourself with some of the stuff. File type is a really helpful thing to find, like Excel spreadsheets, for example, or PDFs. You basically you write file type : PDF, and I'll show you an example in a second. Back in the day, I used to do file type : MP3 to find MP3s. I'm sure some of you have done that. But that is useful. So is site or domain. So you can do Google searches within a specific domain. So if you want to find pages on your local Minneapolis.gov site, or whatever the domain is for the city, the official domain is for the city, you can specify that as a domain and do searches within that. So I'll show you some examples. So one thing that's fun to do is things like this. So you can see we have in quotes, because I want this exactly, for internal use only. And then I've specified file type, Excel spreadsheet, site, gov. So what is that going to give you? That's going to give you government sites that have Excel spreadsheets that say for internal use only. And that can be a fun thing to do. You don't find tons of stuff doing that. And this is not so much helpful, I think, for your monitoring work, but it can be helpful more on the reporting side, especially if you have other reporting projects. But same thing here with things like this is confidential. I've found a number of things in my own reporting back when I was doing more local city reporting that were useful this way. But yeah, advanced search on Google is awesome. And I think that is it, actually. Let me see. Yeah. So thank you for joining. If you go to our the training page on our website, firstdraftnews.org, and you just hit on the training tab, we have a number of essential guides that we've written. Amy may have mentioned the one that we wrote for information disorder yesterday. We also have one on monitoring that is chock full of other monitoring tips, and you'll hear more of them from Rory on Thursday.